find it hard to speak up. Okay. So let me very quickly respond to those comments. I thought they were fantastic comments. Dana was kind enough to send them to me in advance, and so I had a little chance to think about them. I think they pose real challenges to some of the arguments in the paper, which I'm already worried about, and now I'm more worried about. So I'm not quite sure that I have adequate responses, but I still think that the arguments at least have some intuitive force, and I have some hope that I'm going to be able to get them to work. Let me just say that I think Dana is probably right about excuses. Maybe we can distinguish between excuses and denials of responsibility. And in denials of responsibility, then the fact that you're a long way away from what's justified is going to be significant in getting you off the hook. So if I'm just sleepwalking, I'm just not responsible at all. So if I strangle someone whilst sleepwalking, then even though that's really far away from being justified, I still get off the hook. But that's because when I'm sleepwalking, I'm not excused, I'm just not responsible at all. Whereas in excuse cases, it's my reasoning that's been undermined. And now even in these phobia kinds of cases or compulsion cases, I think people respond when the challenge is big enough in the appropriate way. So someone says, if I've got a fear of spiders, and they say, I'm going to put spiders all down your shirt unless you shoot someone, I don't think I'm excused for shooting someone. And the reason why I think that is partly because if the gun was to my head, I think I would be able to put spiders down my shirt even with the phobia. So I don't think phobias and compulsions always undermine, and then these justification cases, people should have these very visceral responses to acting in a very strongly unjustified way, and so even these compulsions aren't going to get them off the hook, I think, or at least not completely. On the question about, so there was a question about the role of duties in my view. So I have this view, which I'm sure too many of you have had to put up with for too long. The one way to try and justify harming a person is to think about what they would be required to do. And Dana rightly objects that that kind of justification isn't always going to work because not all duties are enforceable. So it's true that sometimes a person can have a duty to do something and that yet you're not permitted to do it to them because the duty is unenforceable. They have a right to do wrong, you might say, in these kinds of cases. I think that Dana's thought goes something like that. And then we want to know what the moral considerations are behind the right to do wrong. And I don't have a fully worked out account. I agree that it sometimes respects autonomy to permit a person to act wrongly. So it's sometimes we ought to allow people to act wrongly because of autonomy considerations. The fact that they are permitted to act wrongly may enhance their ability to act rightly for the right reasons. It might strengthen their resolve. It might give them opportunities to explore certain kinds of actions which might lead them to better judgments in the future. So those look like considerations which sometimes give us a right to do wrong. But in the case that I'm focused on, where Helen threatens me to kill Jeff, in that case, Jeff would, and Jeff's doomed to die anyway in this case, Jeff would have a duty to select me, and that duty I think would be enforceable. I don't think Jeff has a right to do wrong in that case. If we could force Jeff to press the button which would select me as the killer rather than Helen, and that would then save my life, and Jeff is doomed to die anyway, I think Jeff not only has a duty to press the button, he has an enforceable duty to press the button. And so it's okay then for me to kill him. In doing so, I'm doing what he would have an enforceable duty to cause me to do were he able to do it. And that, I think, is respectful. So I think Dana's right about some of these cases that they are intuitively a bit difficult. In the sword case, Dana was worried that maybe it's wrong to give the person the sword to save the 5. I think it's probably permissible to give the sword to save the 5. It looks like a kind of doing and allowing case. It looks like in some cases of doing and allowing, we're allowed to save 5, killing 1. In other cases, we're not. I'm not sure that I know why we distinguish between these different cases, but it's true that we have different intuitive judgments in different cases. I don't have a worked out version of why that should be. Intuitively, I think sword falls on the side of the permissible. But I don't have a... I mean, maybe that's just because these other duress features that I picked out are also morally salient, and that may be driving our intuitions too in these cases. Let me move on to Dana's thought that when I'm used as a means, I can also use someone as a means, and that's true. So it's not always going to undermine the complaint that I've used someone as a means, I think. So I need to think a bit more about this, but think about this kind of case. Imagine that Helen threatens me that if I don't throw the large guy off the bridge in front of the trolley saving the 5, she'll shoot me. Now I would be using the large guy as a means. And you might think it's wrong for me to use the large guy as a means. There's a powerful constraint on me doing that. And in this case, even though I would save 5, I wouldn't be permitted to do it to save my own life, and so I ought not to respond to the threat in that case. Now, is that case like the duress case? I think it's different. And I think it's different for the reasons I tried to pick out in the paper, that in the standard duress kind of case, what I'm doing is I'm forming an intention to act on other people's intentions. And I think this undermines a certain kind of complaint that I'm using a person as a means. It's like I've turned myself into a robot. You know, I'm just kind of responding to whatever Helen tells me to do. She's just authorizing, she's just like controlling me, and I'm creating the conditions under which she controls me by creating this second order intention. So imagine I could turn myself into a robot where I just automatically responded to her commands. I don't think then Jeff would have a complaint. And if he wouldn't have a complaint in that case, why should he have a complaint about me forming these conditional intentions to do whatever Helen says? Now, obviously, there's going to be some limits on what when I can turn myself into a robot in this way. I'm not saying that it's always okay to do it when there's a serious threat. If I think she's going to use me to kill 1 million people, obviously I'm not allowed to do it. But assuming that the only thing that's going to happen is I'm going to kill Jeff, I don't think then Jeff has a complaint that I am using him as a means if I turn myself into a robot. He has a complaint against Helen, but not against me, I think, in that case. So I think although it's true that I can be used as a means and used as a means at the same time, I don't think that undermines the force of the thought. And then the crowd case, I think, is fantastic. It's such a great case. I don't know quite what to think about it. I'm tempted to say that the intuitions are a bit weaker in the crowd case than in the Jeff case, where Jeff can say, look, I can say to Jeff, look, you're already involved, and that makes a real difference. And in the crowd case, I can't say to anyone that they're involved. All I can say is there's a group of people who are all together kind of involved, and this person's a member of the group, and I couldn't say to any particular member of the crowd, I don't think, you would have a strong obligation to prevent Helen from killing me if you could. Whereas I can say to Jeff, you have a strong obligation. Now, all of these people may have a weaker obligation together, and maybe that makes a difference in this kind of case. So I need to think a bit more about that. So the crowd case, I think I need to think about a bit more, but I'm not sure that it poses a decisive objection. There's two kinds of responses, one to try and distinguish these cases, or another to try and say, all the members of the crowd have this very weak duty to help, but still stronger than mere bystanders, because they're having the threat imposed on them, which is not sure who's going to be picked out yet. So think about people who aren't members of the crowd. They have weaker duties, I think, to protect me from Helen than members of the crowd, and that might help to justify the same kind of conclusion in the crowd case. So there's a lot more to say about that crowd case. I think it's a great case. But I'm optimistic that there'll be something that's out there to say about it. Okay, let me leave it there and open for questions, of which there are a few.
Okay, so let's operate with the following assumption that those who haven't had a chance to ask a question get first dibs. How's that?
Okay, that's good. But I don't think that's anyone in this crowd. Sorry, I'm just writing down the names. Okay, so everyone's asked, I think. Right, let me start with Larry. Sorry.
I'm just the robot.
Yeah.
Who's first?
Thanks, Victor. I really liked it. Surprisingly, I suppose, in that I don't often like the way that you do these. But let me take you back. Let me take you back to the actual case that you started with, that you didn't really return to in a certain way. One very small quibble is that it wasn't the first case for the ICTY. The Tadros case was, but in any event, it was one of the very first, and it is true that it's had a lot of controversy, and in fact, deservedly so. One of the reasons why I've always found the case so tragic, and you didn't mention this fact, but I wanted to know what you thought about this aspect of it, was that Erdemovich claimed that he was a pacifist, and that this made it especially tragic, that he was singled out in this way. It would have been different, at least one of the judges said, if he had not had especially strong worries about killing, whereas Erdemovich really did. So I wanted to know whether that made a difference for you, and if so, in which way? Some folks have said it could go in one of two different ways, in fact. But that was in fact, as I read the case in the various opinions, that was a fairly important consideration.
It's kind of weird, though, because he joined the Serbian Armed Forces voluntarily as a job, so he wasn't much of a pacifist. I mean, no, he wasn't. He joined to get a job because he needed to take care of his family. That was part of the judgment. I don't think he was a pacifist, but if he was a pacifist, I don't think it makes any difference. I don't think pacifists have extra duties. I don't think they have. I think they have a silly view, but they don't have extra duties or extra rights just merely by having a silly view. So I don't think it would make any difference whether he was or not. No. I mean, so the fact that he decided to give up his daft view and shoot people under the right kinds of conditions, that's not tragic. I mean, you can say it shows a lack of integrity because he's given up his pacifism, but I kind of figure that integrity is only valuable insofar as your integrity is built around something that's genuinely valuable, and I doubt that's true in this case. So sometimes people have obligations to kill people, and so if the only way to save people who are very seriously threatened is to kill someone, you ought to kill them. And so I think having a genuine pacifistic view, I think, is mistaken. You shouldn't generally have that view, because you might find yourself in the circumstances where it's wrong not to kill. Okay, so Jeff.
Thanks, Victor. What you said was that the potential victim of the person under duress is more liable to be harmed than an innocent bystander. So if Helen's going to kill you, if you don't kill me, my presence there for Helen to pick out as the person you have to kill, I'm her incentive somehow, has proven to be a disadvantage to you. And for that reason, my immunity is somehow weakened. And what I want to suggest is that that's equally true of many innocent bystanders. So I think you're not justified in claiming that there's this difference between the potential victim of a person under duress and innocent bystanders in general. You've got to make a more refined claim. That's because suppose Helen is going to kill you unless you lob a grenade at her. It's going to blow her up, but it's going to kill me also as a side effect. Now, you presumably think that you're not permitted to do that because you can't kill me, even as a side effect of saving yourself from Helen. But now in that case, my presence here is also an obstacle to your being able to save yourself. My presence is a disadvantage to you in the same way that it is in the case of the duress. And a couple of people, Alec Wallen and Gerhard Overland, have claimed that this fact about me as an innocent bystander is actually what explains our intuitions about the difference between bystanders and people who are then used as a means in a way that gives an alternative account of what's going on in these cases from the account given by the doctrine of double effect and other things. So the point here is that I think you need to see that your view lumps together the killing of the potential victim of the person under duress with the killing of innocent bystanders as a side effect, and distinguishes those two types of case from a case like the human shield. And that is that in the case of the human shield, that person's presence there isn't or that person's absence wouldn't be, I'm sorry,
Had the shield not been there, it's not that you would have been okay. So the idea here is this, that if I hadn't been there when Helen puts you under duress, you would have been okay, because there wouldn't have been anybody for her to pick out. Similarly, if I hadn't been there when she threatens to kill you and you had your grenade, you would have been okay had I not been there. So in both those cases, my presence disadvantages you. In the case of the human shield, it's quite different. If the human shield hadn't been there, you wouldn't have been okay. You would have just been killed. So the human shield presents you with an opportunity. But both the bystander and the potential victim of the person under duress are kind of, their existence is a kind of cost to you. So those cases are together.
Good. So I agree with all of that. So in the standard trolley case, where you turn from 5 towards 1, so one part of the justification is that you're not killing the 1 intentionally, you're not killing them as a mean. And part of the justification is that were you not permitted to turn it, this person will be making you worse, making the 5 worse off by their presence, because otherwise the track would be free. And so you could turn the trolley away from the 5. So I think there's these two things going in those kinds of cases. So I like the thought that Alec Wallen and Gerhard Overland have. I agree that it has moral significance. I deny that it provides the whole explanation for what's going on in cases like Bridge and Human Shield. So I think that the fact that you use a person as a means is one important factor, and the fact that you would benefit from them is another important factor. When they come apart, I think the means principle is still significant. I have some weird cases involving portcullises, which I'm not going to try and lay out now, which try and show that this is intuitively right. But not everyone shares my intuitions, of course, so I'm not sure it's going to work anyway. But so I think they have part of the story, but not the whole story. So I agree. So in a case like insurance, where you blow up the shop, one of the reasons why you're allowed to blow up the shop, I think, and kill the bystander is that were you not allowed to do that, the bystander would be making you worse off, because you would then have to be killed, and that's part of what grounds the permission to blow up the shop. I don't think it's necessarily the most important factor, but it's an important factor in that case. Thanks for the question. So, Adil. Sorry, can I just read out this? I have Adil, BJ, Saba, Helen, Matthias, and then is there anyone else who I haven't got? Sorry, Kai and Seth, sorry. Oh yeah, you haven't asked a question. Is that true? Okay. So let me take Adil and then I'll take Kai.
Okay, so first just to back you up with respect to Jeff's question. It's true that in both the duress and side effects both have the non-opportunistic feature in common, but you still think there's something worse about manipulative agency using as a means that's still present in duress but not in side effects, so that would still be significant for you. My main questions are about the conditional intention stuff. So first, it seems sort of weird that if I form the conditional intention, I will do X if Helen threatens to kill me if I don't do X, then I will do X, rather than just the basic intention, I will kill Jeff because Helen has threatened to kill me if I don't. So it seems sort of weird that the permissibility would depend on whether I form the conditional intention or the basic intention. I don't know how many people form that conditional intention in general. So suppose Helen starts talking to me and she says, I will kill you if, and I say, wait, Helen, stop. Stop right there. Okay, hang on, let me form a conditional intention. Whatever Helen tells me to do, I will do that thing because she's threatening my life. Okay, now Helen, continue. Tell me what it is that you want me to do. Right? Whereas if she says, kill Jeff or, and I say, wait, oh, well, I can't really help you out there. I don't have a conditional intention. I'm just kind of a basic intention. That's not going to do the work. So that seems really strange. So I have questions about the conditional intention stuff, but then I also have questions about about whether responsibility impacts permissibility, much like Dana did. So suppose Helen not only gives me the gun, right? So she has that much responsibility for me killing Jeff, but she also takes the safety off. She makes sure that there's a round in the chamber. Maybe she helps me aim, tells me how to stand while I'm pointing a gun. So her responsibility is going up. But it doesn't seem like those things affect the permissibility of my shooting Jeff. So that suggests that the degree of her responsibility doesn't really affect the permissibility of my action.
Good. Okay, so on the conditional intensity, I didn't mean to suggest that you should distinguish those two cases. I meant to suggest that when you think about the case which doesn't involve the conditional intention, the person can appeal to the idea that they would be permitted to form the conditional intention and then follow the instruction. So the person who just follows the instruction could just say something like this. When I followed the instruction, I was just acting on someone else's command. And it's okay to turn myself into a tool for that person. I just did this real fast. But they're not forming the conditional intention there. They don't need to, but they can just appeal to the idea that this is a way of, it's just a way of explaining what it means to be someone else's tool. Yeah, it's that the person really wants to say.
I forgot that for you, permissibility can turn on counterfactuals. It would be permissible if.
Right.
That doesn't actually occur, but it's still permissible.
Right, but it's not really that, so I don't want to say the person should appeal to that. They should just say, I followed Dana's instructions. When I followed her instructions, I was just acting as her tool. Can that undermine the complaint that Jeff has that he's used as a means? To which the answer is, think about other cases where a person can either turn themselves into a tool or give a person a tool. If it's okay in all those kinds of cases, here's another case where it looks like it's going to be okay. That's how the reasoning's supposed to go, something like that. So does responsibility affect permissibility? So does the fact that Dana would be more responsible diminish my responsibility? I didn't really want to argue that. I don't think that's true. I think that the fact that there's a different thing going on, which is how much I'm responsible for a harm makes a difference to what I'm permissible to do. So if I'm less responsible for a harm, then I'm not, then it's easier to justify harming the person. So the thought is something like, so some people think this about intentions. So when I intend to harm as opposed to harming as a side effect, I become especially responsible for the harm, because it's more deeply connected to my agency than it would be if it was a mere side effect harm. So Nagel and people want to argue like that. I don't think that's quite the right reasoning, but I think something similar is true. I think when I intend to affect a person, I become especially responsible for that person. I become especially responsible to protect them because they're part of my plans, and that can make it especially true that I ought now to ensure that I affect them only on condition that I don't harm them, and that can make it especially wrong for me to harm them. And that's in contrast with the case where I only affect a person as a side effect of my actions. So my responsibility, my level of responsibility for a harm can make a difference to what it's permissible to do. That was the claim. And then in these cases, I'm less responsible because this isn't my plan. It's not the plan isn't mine. It's not deeply me. Something like that. Okay, who was next on the list? Kai, wasn't it?
Yeah. I'm very skeptical of the double effect, means principle, Alec Wallen's restricted claims principle, all of these kinds of principles. And let me raise an objection to the means principle specifically. So we start with the trolley case, where you push the large guy into the tracks to save the five. And it seems like very disrespectfully using this person as a means in a way that results in him being harmed, right, killed. But then you say, well, suppose instead of large guy over the tracks, right, you got large, well, it doesn't have to be large anymore, a guy in his car, right, and the guy, you need to push the car in front of the trolley to stop the trolley. The guy being in the car is irrelevant. He wouldn't even stop the trolley by himself, right? It's the weight of the car that's able to stop the trolley. There, you don't use a person as a means, but it seems to me utterly just as wrong to push the car in front of the trolley, so the means doesn't seem to be playing any role in the first case. Now, someone like Kwong will come along and say, well, you got to expand the means principle, so if you use someone as a means or their property as a means, that's especially wrong. The problem there, first of all, is that it doesn't seem, you've lost this idea of the disrespect and actually exploiting the person, right, when you're just extending it to his property. But setting that aside, right, change the case again. Now it's not, you got the car, you got to push in front of the trolley, and there's this guy somehow tied to this car. He doesn't own the car, it's not his property or anything. So you push the car in front, the guy goes down with it and gets killed. That seems just as wrong to me as well. So I just don't have the intuitions, I guess, that support buying into the means principle, even Kwong's extended version of it.
So there are some cases where, I mean, They're tricky, these cases, because you want to know what other principles might explain why it might be wrong to throw the car off. I'm not sure that I think it's as wrong to throw the car off as I think it's wrong to throw the person off, where the person doesn't make any difference to the killing. So if the numbers stack up differently, I think I might distinguish those cases, actually. I don't think it's as wrong. But we now want to know why it's sometimes wrong to do something which doesn't use a person as a means to achieve a certain result. So Francis Cam has riding roughshod cases or splash cases where it still looks wrong to harm the person, to harm the person even though it's not as a means. So I'm driving to save 5 and I'm going to go through a puddle of acid and splash someone and that will kill them. And it seems like it might be wrong to do that. Philippa Foot had a case where I can invent a serum to save 5, but inventing the serum will release something into the atmosphere that will kill 1, and that seems like it might be wrong. Something's going on in those cases, and I don't know quite what it is. So when I said about doing and allowing, I said, well, there's some cases where it looks like it's okay, and I think sword falls on the one side, and then there's these other cases where it looks like it's wrong, and maybe your car case falls on the other side, and we need to find a principle which explains the differences between these cases, and I don't have an explanation of what it is. But I don't think that undermines the significance of the means principle. Something's explaining these cases, but that doesn't show that the means principle itself is not valid. It just shows there are other things which are also wrong. And now we want to know what's wrong with using a person as a means, and I think what we want to say there is something like this. A person has a right to set certain ends for themselves, to determine their ends for themselves rather than having their ends determined by someone else. And when you compel a person to serve an end, you fail to respect that right. So think about the bridge case, the guy's on the bridge, and you think about whether he would have an obligation to jump in front of the trolley to save the 5. I say no, he could set other ends for himself other than the end of saving the 5. If it's wrong for, if it's not true that he's required to jump in front of the trolley, it's also not true, I think, that someone could force him to jump in front of the trolley, just on the basis of the principle that says you can't force a person to do something to serve an end where they don't have a duty themselves to serve that end. And that seems like a forceful principle to me. So that gives force to the means principle. Now, that's not to say there aren't other principles that are going to be similarly stringent to the means principle, but I think that's not to say that that principle itself doesn't have force.
We've gone over, but I think we can take a couple more questions.
Sorry, I'm talking too long.
No.
BJ.
Okay, so this has to do with what Dana did with the crowd case, and this is, I want to push back kind of in a different way than Jeff did. You suggested that although Jeff is not liable in these kinds of cases, this has to do with the reason it's not opportunistic is because you argue that the threat occurs in virtue of Jeff's presence. Right, and so because of that, you argue that although he's not liable to be killed, he has to share a greater burden of a greater share. Like if we were doing like a lottery or something like that, if we had some fair distribution mechanism, right, he has to have a little bit of a higher percentage. He has to share or shoulder a greater amount or possibility of the burden of this indivisible harm, right? Because somebody has to die, and so he should share a little bit more of it, even though he's not liable. I want to push against that. We can expand the crowd case even much worse. The crowd case just kind of spreads that out, is what your view would hold. But what if Helen did something like this? What if Helen was saying, she's putting you under duress, and she says, hey, I'm going to kill Jeff, but what she actually has is she has a random person, like a random number generator, and she has every human being in the world with a number, and she's just constantly just changing this every second. Actually, I'm going to put you under duress unless you kill this guy, and then, now this guy, now this guy, now this guy. So what you would have to say in that case is like, oh, well, whoever it happens to be, because of virtue of that person's presence, I'm under this threat, so therefore that person at that exact moment has to have this higher share. The odd result that would have would be that there'd be this weird share, this burden that keeps shifting randomly. And I think in those kind of cases that people could say plausibly, this has nothing to do with me. You said it's implausible for Jeff to say, this has nothing to do with me. I think it is plausible to have to do with it. What it has to do with is Helen's malintent, right? And if we randomize that, then you can plausibly say it has nothing to do with the person. And if that's true, then it just would be really weird, right? That this extra thing that Jeff has to bear, why does he have to bear it? If we randomize it, it seems like there's no non-arbitrary reason to make that the case.
Okay, so there's two different ways of responding, as I said to Dana in response to Dana with the crowd case. One is to say maybe it's wrong to kill under duress in these cases, especially wrong, more wrong than it is in the case that we had before, because there's no person who is the person that's really generating the threat. It's just think about the causal mechanism of how the threat emerges. The threat emerges through Helen wanting to kill someone. And that's what creates the threat to me. And then it happens that this person fills the place of the someone. Whereas in the original case, it's Jeff that's causing the threat directly. And maybe that makes a difference to the way, that's the difference in the way in which the threat's caused. And maybe that makes a difference in these kinds of cases. So maybe it's, so I could have a more constrained principle that says it has to be that Jeff brings about, that Jeff's presence causes the threat in a certain kind of way. It's in virtue of Jeff in particular, rather than just anyone, that the threat emerges, that Jeff needs to bear certain costs. Alternatively, like I say, it could be just anyone, and it doesn't matter, and in that case, we can just say about the whole of the world that each person has to bear the relevant kind of cost. But now, of course, there's no particular person that bears the greater cost.
No, I'm suggesting it is a particular person that keeps shifting. Helen's really psycho. And she's
Yeah, but that person isn't the cause of the threat now. That person's presence isn't the cause of the threat. If that person hasn't been there, it's just someone else that fills the place. So that person's not the cause of the threat. The threat already occurs. Helen's already threatening me. And now a person comes and fills the place. So they're not now the cause of the threat. So maybe they don't have to bear the costs now.
That person is the constant changing cause of her threat towards you. And so my point is, it just seems arbitrary to say, well...
Is that right? Is that the right way to see the case? So think about, she forms this intention to kill someone, whoever comes up on this thing. And then she presses the button and a person fills the place. I don't think it's right to say that person's the cause of the threat.
They take their own attention.
Right. Right.
Let's take one more question.
Who was next on my list? I'm walking around too much. Saba.
Okay, so just an example to push back against the notion, an example to push back against the notion that forming the second order intention, becoming a robot, reduces Dee's responsibility for what she subsequently does. And this example is owed in part to Craig. I want to kill my enemy who's innocent. I can't get at my enemy. I'm in an alleyway at the top of the buildings. I have a grenade. I throw it down at you. You're not my enemy. You're just some random guy. I don't have a direct shot to my enemy. I know if I throw the grenade at you, you have this grenade in your hand, you're going to throw it away in the only direction that you have available, and that's to my innocent enemy. So lo and behold, my innocent enemy is killed. Now, so that's one example. Now compare that to an example where the grenade is just left over from the previous war and just happens to fall on you. And you have a grenade and you throw it towards the innocent guy over there. And in both of these cases, it's phenomenologically identical from your point of view. From your point of view, there's a grenade that falls from the sky. So do you want to say that your responsibility for what you do is different in these two cases?
So it's a different kind of case. So in the case where I turn myself into a robot, I just turn myself into a tool for another person.
Yeah.
I'm following that person's commands myself directly.
Yeah.
And that seems to undermine my responsibility.
Okay.
Whereas in the case that you've got, that's not true.
Yeah.
There is another person who bears responsibility, but it goes back to my thought with Adil. I didn't want to say that the fact that one person has responsibility somehow, responsibility is not like a cake where if someone takes more, everyone else gets less.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to say that. That's clearly not true. The more conspirators you've got doesn't reduce the responsibility of each.
So if all I have to do is just say before I throw the grenade that I'm throwing this grenade at you, if you don't throw it at the innocent enemy, you're going to die, that makes a difference? Just saying the command, informing you? It seems like what matters is manipulating you, not telling you that I'm manipulating you.
I think that's right. So I think that it's the fact that it's how my agency gets undermined that seems important in these duress cases. So what drives the intuition in the duress cases, I think, which distinguishes them from the human shield cases, is that in the duress cases, there's a different form that my agency takes when I harm the victim. And in the grenade case, that's not really true. The mere fact that someone says they're going to throw a grenade to me isn't going to change the nature of my agency when I throw the grenade. I mean, it's going to be impermissible in that case anyway for other reasons. But now imagine that the grenade's thrown to me and there's 5 of us. Will I be permitted to throw the grenade on to another person? Well, it looks like a side effect case and I'll be permitted in that case.
Yeah.
But just focusing on the feature, whether my responsibility is somehow undermined. I think what seems to matter is the way in which my agency gets altered by the other person offering me commands. That's what I wanted to capture. And that's not a feature of that case.
Well, we can talk about it.
Good. Thanks very much to everyone for questions, and sorry for the people that got left out.
So, as we all know, life is a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So some of you are headed to the airport tomorrow. And for those of you who might be interested in getting an extra chocolate in your taxi or town car or what have you might not know who it is, please let me know if you're interested in traveling with someone else to the airport and sharing the cost of a taxi ride or a town car ride, and I will try to put you all together at the same time. Okay, let me know at lunchtime.